Welcome to the Empower Me Show with Pam Bright. This show is all about honoring you as a spiritual being, having a human experience. You are here for a reason, and it's no mistake that you are here on earth right now. Spirit has guided you to this very moment in time, so you could hear the messages Pam is about to share with you. She is a multidimensional healer, light language channel, transformation coach, wife and mother, committed to helping you discover the tools and practices to empower you to live the best life you can. You get to choose the spirit path you take. You can connect to the spiritual guidance already all around you. Get ready to live a fully empowered life. This is the Empower Me Show.
Welcome to the Empower Me Show with Pam Bright, and this is my sweet David Buck, who is my co-host, and we are joined today by our dear friend John Jorza, who's going to speak to us about his challenges and his way of life that he has taken on as a being of inspiration and power in the world today in a very great way.
And today is a special day because it's Memorial Day. So we want to do a quick shout out to all those men and women who have served and helped protect our freedom, and just take a moment. And our grounding for the day to center where we are is just a quick moment of silence to focus on, a brother, a father, a sister, a mother, an uncle, anyone that you know of, even a friend who has served. And they don't have to have passed, certainly, to honor the ongoing efforts to protect our freedoms. So we'll just take a quick moment of silence here to honor that person in your mind. And today we do have someone with us who has served. And we're going to be talking about breaking up the vicious cycles, the vicious circles of violence that continue and perpetuate for one reason or another within ourselves, within our communities, and within our world. And asking the question really, can they be stopped? Can we stop and end those cycles of violence and find another way through them?
Yes. So we would like to hear, John, about your dad. I know that you have had some interesting times with Dad, as well as you're actually covering his life and your life with him growing up. So why don't you tell us about your experience with your father?
Well, I think of it in terms of being a classic 50s and 60s upbringing in middle-class America. Grew up in Ohio in an industrial town where my parents came from a Eastern European bloc country and made it going for the American dream, and were less than skilled at I can't say that, not less than skilled, but didn't have a lot of knowledge about how to raise a young man in this world. That the environmental factors were that there was a kind of a environment of punishment, corporal punishment, and in the city there was this background, not very apparent, but background of the mafia was there, and people were getting killed, and a la the Sopranos, perhaps not that quite that bad, but there was corruption, and people knew about the mafia. I had friends that families and family members that were part of that. I always remember going to a basement dance party as a teenager, and a young woman showing us a wet spot in the cement. It was small. There was some money buried there, the $50,000 evidently, and that her father would kill us if we tried to get at it. And we all laughed and went back to dancing. But that was an example of how violence was a part of the culture, if you would. Obviously not a war-like situation, but and then TV and this was before so graphic of a depiction of violence was ubiquitous nowadays. But even then, it was the cop shows and the Western shooting and all of that was commonplace. My dad was a World War II veteran. As a young man, he was a boxer, and went through World War II, was part of the D-Day invasion, and was exposed to war, to say the least, and violence, and then came back and used corporal punishment with me, and that affected me. That is the cause of what I later did, was battered my two former wives, and had violence around me. And I went to Vietnam, and that was an influence, and several other aspects of my life where I got a mindset that it was okay to hurt others who I felt were hurting me, whether or not that hurt was emotional or never physical. Rarely did I ever get physically threatened, but emotionally threatened, spiritually, if you will, but mostly insulted, that sort of thing I felt. And my first fight or flight, coming from my limbic brain, if you will, was to fight. I ran away at times, but I fought, and that fighting was in the form of aggressively trying to stop or threaten or abuse or be physically restraining, I'm afraid, some women in my life. So I've been, the term perpetrator has been used, batterer, abuser. I've been that in my many years ago, and have worked very diligently to stop it, and, as you say, cycle of violence, stop it within myself and others over the last, let's say, 20 years at least.
It's interesting that part of the purpose of our show is to provide education for people who haven't been through certain things, so that they can have more compassion for those who've gone through. So an interesting journey of words can exist when we go from excuses to influences. It sounds like you were influenced heavily, not just by the things that happened to you, but were happening around you, and that there's like almost an acceptance that a culture of violence and ways of thinking about violence were acceptable when you were growing up.
Yeah, I put it into terms of unexamined, unconscious, if you will, and adaptations that I made. For example, if I was punished particularly harshly, I would fantasize at night as a preteen and a teenager, perhaps, but maybe earlier, but I don't remember, would fantasize about hurting him back in different various ways, using objects and vehicles of larger and larger sizes, I remember. But what I'm pointing to is that I habituated the idea of revenge. Now that was my particular way of ingraining, if you will, night after night, or many nights, or more than a few nights, of going to sleep with this idea is I've got to hurt him. No compassion for him, no seeing his stresses, and no seeing, and not to give him any excuses. He was unprepared for an independently sensitive young man to be in his life, and his lineage and background in the old country, corporal punishment was very common, and my understanding it goes back generations, if not in antiquity. So we've got this unexamined part of us that I didn't start to examine till, well, actually into my 30s, 40s, when my behavior became unacceptable to myself and obviously to others. And I started to look at what's the source of how does this happen that I don't want to be threatening or abusive, and I am. So that dichotomy, and found me really finding out, researching, if you will, bringing the what I don't know up to the surface. And that's what I call my work, and that by having it at least consciously, I can work at changing it.
Absolutely.
There was a time that well, quite frankly, in my 20s and 30s, that I didn't know I had a problem. I thought this was just the way it was. And I'm supposed to, or allowed to, many different ways of minimizing it, my behavior, until it wasn't.
Right. So we're going to go to a break in just a moment. And just to put a finer point on what we're talking about today, it's shining a light on one person's journey through a cycle of violence that has been repeated throughout his life, and his journey out of that as much as possible. And there's a song that comes to mind from Billy Joel, and it's not an excuse at all, but the song is "We Didn't Start the Fire." However, as we go forward with our own evolution, we can start putting out these fires.
Absolutely. So let's go to break. We'll be back to talk more with John Jorza and his amazing journey and his recovery into the man he is today.
Welcome back to the Empower Me Show with Pam Bright. I'm David Buck, and we're joined by our dear friend, John Jorza. I didn't say it at the top, but we've known John for decades. I've known him for 4 decades. So if there's a familiarity here that's coming across, this is one of the reasons why. We've just really empowered each other through our lives together. And today we're talking about John's life and what he's gone through and gone beyond. And just want to, for a quick review, there were many different sources of just perpetuating this idea that a cycle of violence was acceptable in society for John growing up. And so now we're going to talk about what happened for him in his young adulthood.
Yeah. So John, tell us about becoming a young adult. What was it like for you, your service in was it the Navy or the Army?
The Army.
The Army. And how did that continue for you, this what we call and term this cycle of violence in your life?
Well, let me say that I had a happy childhood, a normal childhood, and generally violence wasn't predominant. I certainly had a middle class upbringing and schooling, and looking back and looking at incidents and that were an exception rather than the rule. And that going into college, I went to college for 2 years and was very unhappy there, felt out of place, out of touch, and thought that the military would be a great way of getting to know myself. That was one of my many mistakes in my life, but an error, I should say. And then, but I went into the service, volunteered my draft. In other words, I was drafted early, got thrown into the Army's machinery of training you to kill within days of you, all under days of being inducted and starting basic training, obviously disciplined and conformity, and everybody there was various, they've done movies about basic training. Everybody knows about the stresses and the strainers and the challenges that they are. But it basically tells you and gets you into the mode of young men, a gang-like mode almost of, there's an enemy. It happened to be a North Vietnamese at that time, communist Chinese and North Vietnamese. There's an enemy threatening our freedom. We're training you to kill them in no uncertain terms, and this is how you do it. And you learn to shoot a rifle, hand-to-hand combat, strategies, throwing grenades, all of which is done in a particular disciplined and focused manner, but more of a camaraderie bonding. Young men are bonded to friends there, and then after 8 weeks or so, or I don't know how long it was, seemed like forever, and I was sent to jungle training camp in Fort Polk, Louisiana, and trained further in military policemen, and then sent immediately to Vietnam. There, I was lucky enough not to get infantry assignment and didn't do battle. I was a security guard. So I like to say I spent 12 hours a day waiting to be killed or kill somebody. Mm. So I guarded a perimeter of a large base, and we got attacked twice during that times. One was a mortar attack or rocket attack, where 5 rockets landed in our company area, and close proximity enough to feel shrapnel guy, and it was scary. And I certainly was no hero and terrified, and it brought upon a particular, I attribute that, as well as the ongoing 24/7, if you will, stress of being in a war zone, on a high alert, hypervigilant, to exacerbate whatever PTSD I may have had. I came out of Vietnam, and I was introduced to drugs there, and smoked a lot of marijuana to combat it, self-medicated instead of drinking, which most people did, or reading or playing, didn't have video games there, playing pool or something, but it was a big base, and we decompressed different ways. I came out of the service committed to peace and being a hippie. So I went back to Ohio and still found it not my place to live. And I traveled out through the Southwest to LA, and then eventually San Francisco, to meeting my old buddies from Vietnam, who felt like brothers. There's this camaraderie, and settled down in the Bay Area. Got a job as a veteran, as a custodian in a military industrial complex, Philco Ford, actually, in Palo Alto, but well-paying night job that I did a lot of drugs around before and after, and grew my hair out, my beard, had that lifestyle, lots of music, concerts, parties, etc. And for many years, till 75, that was 1971. I went to California, and in 75, I did S training, now landmark education, and had a transformation in being, and started to address who I was, or who I really am. I'll let that go be the cliff notes of my youth at that.
Well, thank you very much for sharing all of that, John. It takes some courage to stand out there. I know it's not the first time at all for you to describe the events of your life. And again, they're not like excuses at all for behavior, and their influences. It's part of it. We want to shine a light on each person's experience is unique and valid. And the more that we can hear stories about what has happened, the more it starts to make sense why people do different things.
And if I may say quickly, asking and getting answers to the question, why are you violent, John? My family asked me that. Many psychiatrists and therapists asked me that. Actually, not too many, because they knew the answers. It isn't a one reason. It isn't one place. It isn't one experience. It's a series and complex.
Yeah.
No PTSD is simple. Right. And that I bring these, I highlight these so people can have a basis on, well, that affected him that way.
Yeah.
And there's many, 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 many more people that have the same or worse or more intense or damaging or traumatic experiences that don't become to violence.
Mm-hmm.
I think my particular circumstances had something to do with it. And far and above anything else is that I let those influences have an impact on me. I didn't question them.
Yeah.
And that's the change that's I hope to talk about after the break, is that I stopped asking why and I started asking, what will it take?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the turning point. I was just going to ask you, what would you say is the turning point when your transformation, your breakthrough actually happened? And we're going to hear more about that when we come back from break.
And it just as a one last bit here, there are so many ways to stop the cycles of violence within ourselves and within our communities and for our world too. And we're going to hear more about that when we come back from break, because John has done a lot of work on that, not just for himself.
Yes,
so we'll be right back. Welcome back to the Empower Me show with Pam Bright. My name is David Buck, and we're joined by our dear friend, John Jorza today. We're talking about, is it possible to stop the cycles of violence within ourselves and within our communities and our world? And so one of the things that John has done a lot of work on is something that he calls finding another way. And in the beginning, or in the ending, I should say, of stopping the cycles of violence, there's really only one thing that you need to do. It's find another way.
That's right. So what would you say are the most important aspects of finding another way for you, John?
Well, thanks for asking. This is, I can say something about this out of trial and error, that I've tried a lot of things that don't work, and the ones that do, I keep refining and trying to habituate in myself. And I could say fundamentally, there's a process that I went through. It may be out of order for other people or different orders for other people, and that it started with a recognition. And it wasn't easy, and it wasn't pleasant, and it was an acceptance, if you will, my acceptance that I hurt another. Mm-hmm. And it's subtle, but it was pivotal. Of I would threaten or shake or throw things or hit a cabinet or be a classic domestic violence. Power and control, try to overpower and control someone else, and minimize that in my mind, given what I've been talking about violence being just normal, if you will, or in part of the fabric, and an acceptable way of dealing with my own feelings and my own stress, etc. So I would, I finally, and it took into my 40s, I've been doing it very rarely, less than once a year or something like that, but it was enough that I was arrested and turned myself in, and that was the pivotal point where I was confronted with the damage I did. Mm-hmm. And even then I tried to minimize it and go away and mentally try to stop it. But it was the turning point. Oh my good, what did I do here?
Mhm.
Oh, she's very hurt, not just physically, but emotionally. And I've been doing, and the recognition that I've been doing it for years of some kind of control, and that no wonder she doesn't love me anymore, and eventually divorced me, my second wife. And this is the woman I gave myself to and the love of my life. So I'm not saying this is not unimportant. This was critical, and that's when I started to look this way rather than her. And I was in a domestic violence intervention program at a local facility, services, Wellspring Family Services in Seattle here, and was in a program, 2-year program of changing people's beliefs, thinking, and then behaviors about being violent, abusive. And even the first 6 months of that, I was kind of arrogant. I know it all. I'll just walk through this and get on the other side and go back to my marriage, and really the way I was. This isn't going to affect me. And 6 months in, she filed for divorce, and I became despondent and got help from the therapist there and some other places at the VA, which has been very helpful for me therapeutically, and around PTSD particularly, and decided, if he was given the choice in the program to continue, or I wanted to quit and get out. And that's one of my patterns. And they said, you can do this. And you to that point, I didn't think that I could. I didn't think I could make any changes. That it felt like I was hopelessly at the effect of these emotions, these hormones, these thoughts that overran my rational thoughts of not doing anything like this. And it is part of the limbic brain fight or flight system that takes over, and when threatened, when a human being is threatened. In my particular background led me to accepting that. And the turning point for me was I can beat this thing. I can stop it in time. And I began to work in this 2-year program more diligently in that direction of what can I do to stop it? So I started looking earlier and earlier in these incidents. They had us write out each incident that happened that we were controlling or abusive or potentially violent, aggressive, what have you. And I'd see these feelings and ideas and thoughts and beliefs that I had happening in some pattern. And I began working on the precursors of my behavior and clearing them up through various therapies, various things that I listed in the resources that I use to deal with, resolve issues that I before that had taken out on who I thought was the source of it, and wrongly so. So that was another thing, is that I recognized that the way I thought and the voice, if you will, in my head that said you got to hurt her or stop it, had a particular pattern, a particular age, and repetition. It was habitual. They were the same things. So the big thing for me was I could recognize the precursors and then the thoughts that are getting me closer to being violent, and take action then. Either precursor, eat breakfast, relax, do breathing, reevaluate, make my considerations, relax my body, all kinds of things that would de-escalate rather than escalate.
Yeah. So thank you so much for sharing all this information. I think a couple of the most important things I take from it is there's no short answer. There's no quick way through. It's a lifestyle change. It's an ongoing effort to change the patterns that you keep repeating within yourself,
Yes.
whatever those patterns are. And there's so many different influences. Just to take a quick moment, I have one that I'd like to have our audience hear about, RC. But besides that, maybe there's one or two others that have been most impactful for helping you.
RC is reevaluation counseling, also called co-counseling. It's been around since the 50s, and it's peer-to-peer counseling to people that are trained and well-versed into listening, which is critical, and then what's called discharging, or emoting those feelings that are natural to human beings, that are ways of healing distress, trauma, any kind of distress, whether it be verbal or emotional or spiritual. You're distressed, and laughing, crying, shaking, nothing, tremors perhaps, nothing violent or epileptic or anything, laughing, crying, and there's a couple more ways of discharging, talking fast, getting something out. It's not storytelling, it's not excusing, it's not about, but emoting.
Yeah.
So in one person will be emoting for a specific amount of time. At the end of it, it's stopped. Process of becoming normalized, if you will, out of that state, and then switch the same amount of time. So there's an equal, the person being a counselor and counselee, and it's left at that, and it's structured, and it's giving yourself time to discharge, to release the emotional distress in your body, in your soul, in your mind. And what happens is you have a clarity that's not there anymore. It's gone. The person listening accepts it, doesn't say anything. You're in fact encouraged to be more emotive and more discharging, and you're doing fine. And it's based on that no one's there's nothing wrong with you.
Yeah.
There never was, and there never will be.
Nice.
So you're supporting each other and letting go of those things. That's RC, or reevaluation counseling, is a tool that I use today, and it's a release valve. So that's working on, I don't get stressed out and triggered near as much.
Yeah.
And if I do get close to that, I'll take it into a session rather than take it out on, quote, the threat, which isn't really real.
That's great.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So that's really, really helpful. And I have found in my own life, with my own recoveries in different ways, that really going it, I think of it like a tool that can get right into the center of the problem, right? And just going right into that place.
Yeah.
And then just feeling what's there without any kind of judgment around it. Just feeling it intensely is huge in releasing that valve, like you talk about.
Yeah, if you will, the research is in RC is that animals shake after being traumatized, and that crying as babies is because of discomfort, let's say, but distress, whether they're hungry, they're like that. So it's human to do these things, and that if you encourage them and get into it, you can go back to the source material, the earliest trauma that this present time person is, quote, triggering, but it's not them doing it, and clear up that. So I found it to be in-depth therapy, and useful on many levels. And that your point about, can I say about the lion's roar?
Yes.
Oh, please. Yeah.
Just going through, your point about going through, that change of accepting that I've done harm doesn't mean that I blame or guilt or have shame about it. It means that I'm with it, and I discharge all those feelings about it, and not have them anymore, because someone had accepted it and accepted me for doing it. And it's sort of like in Africa, they train young warriors to run toward the lion's roar. Because an older lion's job is to roar, scare prey into the clutches of, happens to be female, but we won't, to the younger lions. And so when you hear a lion's roar, one generally runs away. Finding another way is running towards the lion's roar, which you find out is you have one old lion that really isn't a danger. And he's one there, and you can go around and actually run through him, is what I say, but without endangering yourself, and find out that he's not a threat at all.
Yeah.
That you just didn't, as a child, you didn't have the expertise and the facilities to discharge it, and weren't allowed to. Part of my upbringing is big boys don't cry, or boys don't cry. You can't discharge, stop crying, don't do that. So that's part of the picture too. So running toward the lion's roar is my tagline. I think you go towards something, through it, and that's how you get past it. If you run away without, like I did with drugs and other activities, you don't ever face it, and you don't get on the other side of it. The other side is through it.
We're gonna go to break in a moment. Pam's got a question for you, but obviously this is such a deep and rich conversation. And I think the important thing for our audience is that there are so many resources available to you to help you deal with whatever's going on for you. And when we come back from the break, we're gonna talk about that a little more, including the work that you've been doing. But Pam's got a good question here for you.
So before we go to break, I'm just going to ask you the question and think about that, and then have you answer when we come back. So what did you have to give up to cause yourself a breakthrough in this area? I want you to think about that, and then we want the answer when we come back.
Welcome back to the Empower Me Show with David Buck, and I'm this is Pam Bright. I'm David Buck. We're still in the middle of the pandemic. We just had our shot the other day, so we have a little brain fog going on. But we're joined here by our dear friend, John Jorza. And we've been talking about how is it possible to break the cycles of violence that we have within ourselves, within our communities, and within the world. And I think the message is it can happen, and it will happen when more and more of us do the kind of work that John has been doing literally for decades. And he's going to talk a little bit more about that. So John, you've been working on a book. Can you tell us a little bit about that book project?
Indeed. Officially in a writer's group, and the intent of which is to accomplish by the end of 9 months, the end of the year, have written a shitty first draft. So I'm in the beginnings of a book writing adventure, and it's what we've been talking about, my early influences, my life. It's a memoir, but also a self-help kind of perspective as well. And I want to write it for the men mostly, and that are abusers and their victims, and for society at large, and that I see this applicable. That one, as to your question about what I had to give up, I had to give up my hopelessness and my helplessness, and that I can't. That I shifted, and I call that shift a transformation, at that, let's say, the bottom of my despair and my hopelessness, and saying I did have a possibility of doing something, I just didn't know how to. And then it became obvious to me that I had to find out. Find out what? Well, something other than what I habitually have been doing, thinking and believing. So I found out having another way of having the same input, the same triggers, the same verbiage, the social dynamic, if you will, the same other people's behaviors, that would elicit something that I could go, do I want that? Can I choose that? I can now. All right, I'm going to choose another way. And not a haphazard, but the rational, logical, okay, what can I change in me?
It's interesting
Got
because
nothing for them.
yeah,
that's the big shift.
even now in this moment, I'm realizing the parallel between the surrender that you're describing within yourself and the surrender as it pertains to war and conflict in a way. To
Yeah.
give up something, to give up a position, there's something so
Thank you.
central to it. We could talk for an entire other show about the power of surrender, and I think we should at some point.
Yes, we need to.
Yes, we should.
We need to do that. Because here's the thing, there's also a parallel between what we're talking about here with John's story and John's life and what we've already been talking about with habits, creating new habits that are empowering for you as a listener. Looking at, okay, so I'm in this position of being stuck, feeling like there's no way out, feeling like I'm doing the same thing over and over and over again, and knowing that it's really damaging. How can you find another way?
Yes,
that's
exactly.
Our biggest message for you in this.
Yeah.
So it is possible to break this cycle. And what is possible when we break that cycle, David?
Well, there's, it's possible to recover and to redeem and to reinvent yourself and reemerge as a new person, as a new being. There's so many ways to do that. On our splash page for this episode, we're going to have a list of resources that John's put together and a few other things. There'll be a Pinterest board of some images that might help you kind of navigate through this, and some music to listen to as well. A big part of what we do here on the Empower Me show, and indeed Pam with her business, Bright Butterfly Enterprises, is to help people find another way. And we've been so inspired, John, by what you've done. Immediately upon hearing it, I saw the brilliance in what you were doing to help yourself find another way through the maze and out the other side, but it can be applicable in so many situations as well.
Yes. And John, I'm so incredibly honored to have you here today. Honored for who you are, honored for what you bring, honored that you are such a courageous soul to have taken this on as a life-changing stand in the world. You're a stand for nonviolence in the world.
Yeah. That's
who you are.
Thank you.
And I am so incredibly honored and grateful that you are in my family. You're in my family. And I love and adore you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
We have just a couple of minutes left in our show, but John, we hope when you publish your book that we're the first stop on your world tour of press, because we'd love to share.
On my junket, yes. I appreciate that. We shall see. If I may say too, is that one of the benefits, or I should say openings and possibility that happened as I cleared up and worked on myself, I got my family back. That I got my two former wives were blended now, accept each other. They had the greatness to forgive me, not forget. They still get handled, if you will, but I'm not stimulated. My behavior changed, and they initiated coming back together as a family because we were split up many years ago. So one gets one's own self-power and really power, not force, and is more oneself by finding your way, finding the way, but not someone else's. And that's what I want to leave you with, is that my journey is one, and yours, it's the direction that's important, not the path.
Yes.
Well,
Yeah.
I love the fact that you make a distinction between power and force.
Yes,
You don't have to force something to happen, and it can be powerful to surrender and let
exactly.
go of a position or a habit. So,
Yeah,
I'm gonna make note of that.
I would also like to echo what you just talked about with self-responsibility.
mhm,
I have said for a very long time that when each individual on this planet takes 100% responsibility for their actions in the world, it will transform this entire world.
Yeah.
So that's my invitation to you as a listener. That's my invitation to you as a person who is willing to go through the fires
yeah,
of your life.
yeah.
That you will absolutely know what it feels like to be in bliss, to be in reverence for life, to be in absolute honoring of yourself as an individual soul, and be able to contribute your gifts to the planet. So, John, I am so excited that you are writing a book. I can't wait to read it.
Yeah.
And please let us know when you're near the time of publishing. I actually had a foresight that you might want to consider, which is to pre-sell your book. Like actually pre-sell it. Because it will, it's going to be published and it's going to be amazing.
So the kind of work that Pam is talking about is work, but it's worth doing because when we change what we're fighting against to what we're fighting for, then shifts can happen. So I just want to say again that we have a splash page full of resources to help you out. And we want to say thank you, John, for being here today. Thank you to our production team at Transformation Talk Radio for hosting our show. We couldn't do this here without you. You could find us on the Empower Me Show. You can just search for Google, email us with any questions or comments, or if you'd like to be a guest on the show, let us know what you'd like to talk about. It's the empowermeshow@gmail.com. And what's coming up next week?
Oh, next week we get to be with the Language of Light once again. It'll be our second episode of the Language of Light. And I will be channeling light language for you, giving you blessings, giving you healings, anything that you need with that, I'm available for. It is a call-in show, so the phone number will be on your screen. You can also email me at the empowermeshow@gmail.com.
Yes.
I had to think about that for a minute.
Yeah.
And let me know what you need. If you also have a loved one that you would like healing for, let me know that as well.
Yeah, for you or someone else. So thank you very much.
We are so excited that you're with us. And John, be blessed. And we will talk soon.
Indeed, dear friends. Indeed.
Thank you for listening to the Empower Me Show with Pam Bright on Transformation Talk Radio. Tune in every Monday at 3 p.m. to learn more about living a fully empowered life. Remember that your life is up to you, and you can choose the spiritual path you are on. There is spiritual energy and wisdom in everything and everyone around you. Listen carefully for what the universe is trying to tell you in every moment. You are already being guided along your journey. Call upon your spirit guides anytime you need help with anything. Know that you are safe in every moment, even if it seems that you are not. For more information about Pam Bright, visit brightbutterflyenterprises.com or email theempowermeshow@gmail.com. Thank you very much for listening. We hope to see you next week.